Hi, today I'm going to be looking at the JMG Hyperspace Reverb. This is an amazing new reverb. It excels both at creating very realistic spaces and creating otherworldly soundscape, sound design reverbs. But what makes it even more revolutionary is the fact that it has depth of control that goes beyond any reverb I've ever seen by quite a long way. So you've got an almost infinite variety of variations on the algorithms. And what makes it amazing is despite the fact it has all these really advanced features that allow you to get in much deeper than any other reverb I've seen, it's really easy to use. The design is brilliant of the interface. It's incredibly intuitive, incredibly easy to get in there and program it on a very deep level. It's just a fantastic piece of work. So I have to hand it to Jason Gibbons. He's done an amazing job on every level on this reverb. So let's have a look. So here we are with the Hyperspace plugin interface. I'm going to go over each of the sections so you can have an overview of what they do. This is the most deep and comprehensive and variable reverb I've ever come across. And although it looks like there's a lot of controls, considering what you can do with this, it's amazingly well designed, this interface, and it looks very simple and easy to get to grips with, considering just how much control you get. So I'll start at the top. We've got wet and dry, in and out levels, presets can be accessed here. You've got a copy and paste with an A and B, which is useful. And undo. You can lock these controls so that when you change presets it doesn't change, say you're in and out in wet and drive. Got a panic button, a limiter which stops the output from clipping, and an auto which adjusts the volume to keep it the same, you know, even if you've changed settings which might make it sound louder to help you A and B things. Then you have these dice here, and what these do is they randomize the settings. The first one randomizes just the XY pads. This randomizes a further degree of controls, and this randomizes absolutely everything. You've got a bypass, and then here you've got the ×2 oversampling. Now this is a really key feature, I find. It really, you know, oversampling on any plugin is not necessarily going to sound better. It sometimes does and sometimes doesn't, and it often can sound different, so it's worth trying both ways. And on this reverb, I find it more than any other plugin I've heard with oversampling, it really changes the quality of the sound in a useful way. So like both settings could be really great. So it's really worth, if you get a good sound, try oversampling or try turning it off, and what you'll get is a really good variation of that sound. And it tends to particularly affect the with realistic sounding spaces, the 3D-ness of the room or space. So now moving on to the main controls, we've got 4 sections which are color coded, which is a really useful way of doing this. I find it really helps you hone in on what they do. The first section, the blue section, is really what you get in most reverbs. In fact, it's more than you get in most even high-end reverbs in terms of control. So what you've got is the time, straightforward, the size of the room, the high-frequency damping. I'm not going to go into the details of these straightforward controls because there's a million videos out there that explain what they do. And any high-end reverbs are going to have these. The density, the early versus late part of the reverb, early reflections versus the tail part of the reverb. And then this, which I've not seen in any other reverb. This is a control which changes whether or not the early reflections are in parallel or series with the tail of the reverb. This allows you to have the have it in parallel, or to any degree you like, feed it into the main reverb in series, so that the early reflections actually feed the main reverb. And that is a big difference in sound between these two, and it's a very new feature I've not seen before in any reverb. Gives you a lot of scope for different tones and effects. Then you've got pre-delay, that's straightforward. This filter is actually a really nicely designed interface, the way they've done this, I find, because if you have it in the center position, it's bypassed. As you move it up, it turns it into a high pass filter, so you're filtering away the low frequencies and leaving the highs, and as you move it down below the 0 point, it turns into a low pass filter, so you're filtering away the highs and leaving the lows. Really really nice design I found on that. You can double click on any control and type in a number, which is really handy. You got modulation here, which quite a lot of reverbs these days have. This happens inside the reverb itself, so it's not like sticking a chorus on the end. It's actually modulating reflections within the reverb algorithm. So it's a subtler effect, but it's more to do with the resonance and how the subtler movements of the reverb in the tail, and really a really useful control. And you can turn it off, which is great. Then this is another EQ. It's a tilt EQ. Again, really useful if you've got a reverb sound you really like, but you just want to emphasize, get it to be a bit more emphasizing the high end or the low end. This is a really useful way of doing that. This is a very innovative control. I've not seen it in any other reverb, or in fact in any other plugin, certainly not in this form. There are a couple of other plugins I can think of that kind of have this, but it doesn't sound like this. It's something I've been looking for a long time in a reverb, and what it does is it changes the distance that the source appears to be. It's using psychoacoustic effects, and it's really great to have this. I've been waiting, as I said, for ages for a reverb to have this. As you move this back, the source, the instrument that you have this on, appears to move back into the soundstage. It's just fantastically, really great to have this. Width control at 0, it's the natural width of the reverb, but you can bring it back to mono or widen it artificially if you like, and that can be useful in some circumstances. Now, I think I'm going to leave the XY pads to last because that's the heart of the reverb, so I'm just going to go through these other sections here. We've got the green section is to do with how the signal goes into the reverb. So we've got focus, which is, does it emphasize the noise aspect or the tonal aspect of the source? Really useful. Changes a lot the tone of the reverb because it's changing what the reverb gets from the source material. This is a really useful control. It will duck the reverb so that if you move this down here, you're going to get the reverb is going to be ducked while the instrument's playing. So if you're finding the reverb sounds great in the gaps, but it's clouding the instrument a bit during when the instrument's playing or voice is singing or whatever it is, you can use this to reduce the level of the reverb while the instrument's playing, duck the reverb. And this is kind of like the opposite in a way, sort of like an expander based on the volume of the input of the instrument. So what it tends to do is to kind of tighten up the reverb with the instrument and reduce the reverb when the instrument stops playing or when the instrument lowers in volume. And so it kind of, it tightens it up, and I find this is really useful if you're doing something like using reverb to reinforce or thicken the sound, but you don't want a lot of reverb wash going on or a lot of tail. This can be great for that because it tightens it up with, it kind of gels it in with the instrument. Really useful. This affects how much of the transient or sustained part of the input signal is fed into the reverb. Again, really useful if you want the attacks to be more emphasized in the reverb, or you want the attacks less emphasized and more the sustained part. Really great. This is also really useful, and I found this is quite a powerful control in terms of changing the sound of the reverb. This way, it compresses the input signal, so you'll get a more consistent amount of the input signal feeding the reverb because it's compressed, and this is more of a kind of expander type idea, which seems to emphasize the louder parts even more. So now moving on to the orange section here. Now this is a lot to do with the early reflections. The multiply and the resonate work with the early reflections, and what this does is it literally multiplies the early reflections, like it duplicates them and adds feedback to them. And this is like, I guess you could almost say, the delay time of the repeats, the distance between the multiplied early reflections. And because the early reflections can be fed into the reverb in series or alongside, that will change how this works in a big way. This is a very powerful control. It really changes the reverb and allows you to create all kinds of reverbs which you can't do in any other reverb I've ever come across. You can even create a nice reverb with a tail with only using your early reflections with this. It's really an innovative and powerful tool. This resonates the early reflections, and this changes the resonation where, I guess, within the reflection frequencies it starts to resonate. Good for special effects, sound design, things like that. Down here we have shimmer, and I find this quite a subtle control. It's not like the shimmer in some other reverbs like Valhalla and other ones, Polaris and things, where you really hear like a strong octave up added. This is more happening inside the reverb algorithm, and it's more of a tonal effect, but very useful in shaping the tonal content. And you can move the pitch anywhere between an octave up and an octave down. And this is, I don't understand exactly what this is doing technically, but basically what it does is it increases the reverb time beyond what you set with the actual reverb time. I don't know how it works, but basically if you turn this all the way up, you end up with a almost infinite reverb, a very great for sound design, drones and soundscapes and things like that. And here you can affect the tone of that. So really useful for sound design. Now we'll move on to the heart of the reverb, which are these two XY pads. And before I explain these, I'm just going to explain what we have at the top here, which relates very much to what these do. What we have is a set of algorithms. There's more than a set of algorithms. Each of these has two algorithms within it. And what happens with the algorithm XY pad is, as you move this control from left to right, it morphs between the two algorithms of which other of these you have selected. So if I select a vintage and I start all the way to the left, I'm 100% one of the vintage algorithms, and if I move this, I can move it this way as well, all the way to the right, I'm now 100% the other vintage algorithm, and in between it's a morph between the two. So you have a huge variation of different algorithms within the two. I'll cover the rest of these controls in a minute, but I'm just going to finish talking about these. So the vintage algorithms are based on plate designs, so they're like plate reverbs. The classic are based on two high-end, very famous hardware reverbs based on those algorithms. Retro is based on two well-known software reverbs. Modern are two algorithms developed specifically for hyperspace, and these are really real sounding algorithms. Fantastic. I have to hand it to Jason Gibbons, the designer of this. These are great sounding and really realistic sounding spaces and rooms you can create with this. Then we've got sci-fi, and this is more for special effects and sound design, and it uses frequency shifting and vibrato and other things within the reverb algorithm to give you some interesting textures and effects. And then finally we have cosmic, which is like huge spaces, again great for soundscapes and sound design. And so you can see there's a huge variation of different algorithms, and within each of these a huge variation between the two. So let's carry on with this. So we've got the X left to right movement here, which moves between the two algorithms of whichever set you have chosen up here. As you move up and down here, this is really interesting. This is again, the number of innovative features in this plugin are just astounding. This is one of the most innovative and interesting and smart features. What Jason has done, and Jason very kindly has given me some extra information about some of the functions of this reverb, because I, especially with the reverbs, I really like to know the the inside, as deep as I can understand about what goes on without having, of course, any clue about the programming side of it or reverb design on a kind of technical level. But from a mixing point of view, I like to understand as much as I can. So Jason very kindly has answered my questions and given me some useful information. And some of it is in the manual anyway. So for example, what this does is, I think the manual explains this, what Jason did with each of these algorithms was to use an artificial intelligence program to run different sets of parameters to the algorithms, because if you have an algorithm, however good it is, there are so many different settings within that can be changed, that however good it is, not all the settings are going to sound good. Only certain ones will sound good. And in order to get a lot of variation, I guess with most reverbs, they'll just choose one set of algorithms that sound good, and there you go. These are settings you wouldn't be able to change as a user. These are settings which are more technical settings, which affect how the algorithm behaves. But what has been given to you in hyperspace is a situation where you can move through all the possible variations and settings within an algorithm. It's almost like giving you a whole bunch of algorithms within one rather than just one. So the really clever thing here is that Jason got an artificial intelligence program to run millions of possible settings within the algorithm through and pull out only the ones that sounded really good based on a bunch of criteria that he gave the AI. So in a way, it's his ears and his taste of what great sounding reverb is. Give that to the AI, and the AI runs through millions of different variations and pulls out all the best ones, and he's chosen the best sounding 100 variations from each of these algorithms. And what this does is it moves between those 100 different ones. So the variation is amazing here. And what's mind-boggling is just that as you morph between the two algorithms, you can again move between all these variations, and the variation here is amazing. Never seen anything like this, and they all sound great. It is impossible to make this sound bad. So just astounding what you've got here. And over here, equally really useful is you've got in the vertical position, I'm not 100% clear what's going on here. It's to do with, because it's quite technical and beyond my understanding, and when it comes into the technicalities of making reverbs, coding reverbs. But basically, this is changing how the reflections work tonally. So this is like it's not an EQ, but effectively you get more high-end emphasis here and more low-end emphasis here in general, although that varies a bit depending on the algorithm you're working with. And as I say, it's not an EQ, it's changing how the actual reflections work, the tonal qualities of the actual reflections themselves. So again, it's like changing to different reverbs. It's just amazing. And from left to right, you have what this does is it changes the distribution of the reflections within the algorithm, within the reverb. So moving it over here, and the reflections bunch up more to the beginning part of the reverb, and here they bunch up more towards the end part of the reverb. And at 50% here, you get evenly distributed. So between these two and all these, the amount of reverb sounds you've got out of this thing are unparalleled. And I have to say the quality of them is right up there with the best. So it's just a really groundbreaking piece of software, and I hope you found this useful. If you did, please subscribe and like and ring the bell, all that kind of stuff, and hope to see you next time.